so I wasn't able to talk at all. So as a speech pathologist, I used all sorts of different modalities of communication. So I used eye gaze. I would look at letters on an alphabet board. I used a piece of paper with letters on it, like a QWERTY keyboard, to type letters. And then I progressed to being able to use text-to-speech as my fingers started moving better. Eventually, I was able to use a device called a passing-ear valve on my tracheostomy that allows me to phonate. So just go, So I've used every modality of communication. My swallowing muscles were severely impaired. I was tube fed with a G tube. So again, yes, I've learned what it's like being the patient in the bed. I've learned through desperation what works, what didn't work.
I'm Garrett Salpeter, and I believe that the most powerful and transformative way to help people recover from pain and injury, heal from trauma, and reach their highest levels of fitness and performance is to focus on the nervous system. In this podcast, we'll share knowledge from the frontiers of neuroscience and inspirational stories of how applying that knowledge has empowered people from all walks of life to heal, adapt, and grow. Hello, NeuFit Nation. Welcome back to the Undercurrent podcast. We are joined today by Vanessa Abraham, speech language pathologist, or SLP, and the founder of A New Healing in Southern California out in the Palm Desert, Palm Springs area. And she has a fascinating personal story that I'm really excited to have her on to share, and also a wonderful perspective as an SLP, one of the first SLPs in the whole world using NeuFit. So it'll be a fun opportunity to dive into that world as well for the first time on this podcast. So Vanessa, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for allowing me to be here and having this conversation. I have had this to be honest with you, on my bucket list for 4 or 5 years to tell my story with you, and just thank you in person for everything you've done for me and the rehabilitation population out there. So yes, thank you.
Wow. I'm very honored by that. And what an intro. I'm sure people listening to this are on the edge of their seat to know now, okay, what is this story that she's referring to? So before we get into your professional practice, can you tell us, please, Vanessa, about your experience on the other side, actually being a patient and receiving treatment?
Yes. So as you said, I'm a speech pathologist. I learned 7 years ago, this is my 7-month anniversary, what it was like being the patient in the bed as a speech pathologist with a severe communication, swallowing, and voice disorder. So I acquired a neurological injury. It paralyzed my brainstem and spinal cord. I had the pharyngeal-cervical-brachial variant of Guillain-Barré, PCB variant, and it rendered me unable to move my upper body. I was paralyzed. My vocal cords, I experienced significant nerve damage to my vocal cords, so making it very difficult for me to talk, but I kind of lost my voice. Eventually received a tracheostomy, so I wasn't able to talk at all. So as a speech pathologist, I used all sorts of different modalities of communication. So I used eye gaze. I would look at letters on an alphabet board. I used a piece of paper with letters on it, like a QWERTY keyboard, to type letters. And then I progressed to being able to use text-to-speech as my fingers started moving better, text-to-speech on my phone. And then eventually I was able to use a device called a passing-ear valve on my tracheostomy that allows me to phonate. So just go, So I've used every modality of communication. My swallowing muscles were severely impaired. I was tube fed with a G tube. So again, yes, I've learned what it's like being the patient in the bed. I've learned through desperation what works, what didn't work. I researched everything. How I came across the Neubie and NeuFit was about maybe a year and a half or so outside of rehabilitation. I was going to my trainer and he says, "Hey, Vanessa, I ordered this device. This may work for you. This is something, I had a neurological impairment, neuroplasticity, blah, 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 blah." And I'm like, hey, you know what? At this point, I've tried endermology. I've tried dry needling. I've done acupuncture, red light, craniosacral therapy, you name it. I tried it. I tried all sorts of alternating current devices, you name it.
So just to clarify, so at this point, we're a year and a half removed from the initial flare up and say injury, or the initial onset. And so when you meet your trainer and he's telling you about this thing called the Neubie, what is your level of function at that time? Are you able to speak at all, or what?
Okay. Great question. So I was unable to speak probably for a month and a half.
Okay.
And then I got function back to be able to communicate. The tracheostomy was removed, and I was able to phonate at that time. However, I still had significant vocal cord issues. So I had significant striders, or paradoxical vocal fold motion disorder. So when the vocal cords are supposed to open and close for talking, mine would close and I couldn't breathe. So I still had a lot of weaknesses there. I was tube fed for 4 or 5 months. But by the time I started working with my trainer, I was back to driving. I didn't drive for a year, or not a year, about 9 months. I didn't work for a year. So by the time I started working with my trainer, I was back to driving. I was back to working, more part-time-ish. Was eating orally, was able to talk, but I still had a lot of hospital-acquired weaknesses, just from the paralysis. My upper body was paralyzed, so I had a lot of muscle atrophy, weakness. I was definitely not out of the woods there. I still had a lot of significant weaknesses. So I met with him, and this was when he was purchasing the Neubie from you. And he says, I'm getting this device. He kind of told me about it, and I thought, sure, game on, let's try it. Like I try anything, anything outside the medical world, like anything natural. So I said, let's try it. I'm up for it. So he got the device. He went through all the trainings, and he called me. He's like, okay, I'm ready to go. Let's do this. So I went to his office. I tried it once, and I thought, that was interesting. Came home that night, and I thought, I got to try this again. Called him back. I said, let's book another appointment. Went back again. Kind of liking this. This is something different. This is giving my body a different stimulation, a different feel than all these other hundreds of things that I've tried in the past year and a half. So I kept going back, maybe twice a week doing this for about a month. And then the speech pathologist in me started thinking outside the box. How can this help my patients? This direct current. So of course I go down the rabbit hole, start doing my research, thinking, okay, how can this help my kids with autism? Obviously, stroke patients, we know the good research on that. What it's doing for me in just this month time, that component of neuroplasticity, I felt like my brain and my body were connecting again. They were talking to each other. So I think it was probably about a month or two of using it with my trainer that I came home. I told my husband, I said, I got to get this. This is what's going to get me there. This is what's going to give me my life back. This is what's going to get my daughter her mom back. This is what's going to get me back to Vanessa. So I dove in, got it, never looked back. It's been a life changer, not only for me, but the people that I've worked with on it. I mentioned a minute ago, kids with autism, doing things like the master reset on them have been incredible. And I'm just so grateful that unfolded the way it did, because boy, I've used it for vocal cord strengthening exercises on myself, for swallowing exercises, and not only just strength training too, because I was paralyzed. I have a lot of muscle atrophy.
Wow. What a journey there. So I really appreciate you sharing that, Vanessa.
My
And
baseline too was really good. I was very active beforehand, hike, bike, gym goer. This virus that I had just completely came out of nowhere. I was out camping with my family. One day I woke up and I felt like I've got a bad case of the flu. What's going on? And just within a week's time, I was in ICU, paralyzed, on a ventilator. I was in 2 different ICUs, a couple different rehab facilities, and it really flipped my world upside down.
wow, it sure sounds like it. That's, I imagine, very scary to sort of feel that loss of control of just your body and health.
Yeah, it's traumatizing. One minute you're fine, and the next minute you wake up in an ICU room, and as a speech pathologist, you're not able to talk. And there's a speech pathologist looking over your bed and assessing you. It's like, this is a bad dream. This is not my life. It's supposed to be the other way around, where I'm assessing the patient. not me being the patient in the bed and typing letters on an alphabet board to tell you I'm in pain.
That is,
Scary.
yeah, that is a, a brutal plot twist.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yes.
But I've learned a lot through the whole journey too. It's really opened my eyes to what it's like being the patient in the bed. It's opened up my eyes to what medical trauma looks like. I suffer from this thing called PICS, PICS. It's post-intensive care syndrome. And that is, there's three different domains. There's the muscle atrophy that goes with it. There's the mental side of it, the depression, the anxiety, and then there's a cognitive component of it. So you have a lot of brain fog from being on a ventilator, being in the ICU, just because of all the trauma you've been through. And how the Neubie has helped me with that is your wonderful master reset. One of the things, Garrett, that I learned is that your body cannot heal when you're in fight and flight. And let me tell you, this speech pathologist was in complete fight or flight for many years because I'm scared, as an ICU survivor, as a person that was working full time, raising a child, doing the mom thing, wife. I was busy, busy, busy. And then all of a sudden you're paralyzed. So your nervous system completely derails. And I just thought to myself, too, how am I ever going to heal from this if I'm this anxious, I'm this depressed, I'm this rageful, this scared, all of that, but that goes along with the PICS, the post-intensive care syndrome, the PTSD, the catastrophic thinking of, is this ever going to come back? Like if I go back in for another MRI, is this going to come back? Mm-hmm. So that's another thing, that the master reset. I've been trying to do the reset as much as I can, do that before bed. It helps with just the insomnia that you have from the ICU stay. A lot of trauma happens at night in ICU, so a lot of ICU survivors have a difficult time calming down at night to get 6, 7, even 8 hours of sleep. So that's been a huge game changer for me in that area too.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I really appreciate the emotional depth here that you're sharing with us, and also like most good origin stories, there is certainly a theme of pain to purpose about how you going through this, you've been able to transform or even alchemize that into something very positive for yourself and your patients and all these other people that you've been able to help. So it's, I think, a wonderful story. And, before we go more into your practice, I do want to go back a little bit and see, or just pull on a few of these threads from your story so we can get a few details here that I think will be instructive to listeners. So you talk about that first month or two when you're using the Neubie with your trainer and you start to notice some positive improvements. Are you doing upper body training during that time and you're just starting to see those muscles coming back online? Were you doing any master resets at that time? What were some of those first things that you did that led to these initial improvements that got you interested in diving in deeper?
Good question. So I was paralyzed down to C6. So everything that I did was neck with him. I could not hold my neck up. It was completely flaccid. I had to have a neck brace. It was like a wet noodle, just would fall over. My husband had to hold it up. Yeah, like that is the most bizarre thing ever, right? So that's what we did. That's what we dove in first and foremost with anything, because that was my biggest concern at that time. Like, I need neck strength. Another thing that I have bought was the next level. That's another thing. I use the next level with the Neubie, and hook up all the electrodes. And I love, by the way, your new pads.
Oh, those butterfly shaped ones?
Yes, those are amazing for next level. And yeah, but that's what we started with. And that's the one thing that I was like, wow, I'd walk out feeling like, the spasticity and all the muscles from paralysis, everything just really loosened up. It felt freer. It felt looser. Just that spasticity and the pain too. Here's another thing that I had too, and this is very common with individuals that have had swallowing disorders, is that there can be pain associated with swallowing. So I would go through with the glove and just try to find different hot spots. And that helps significantly reduce the pain associated with swallowing.
That's awesome. So I definitely want to get into that when we talk about all of the neurological function and neuroanatomical discussions for that area of the body, for vocalizing, for swallowing. Since you mentioned the next level too, I'll also do a shout out. So Scott Dickinson is a physical therapist who created that product, the next level NECKS, and he was actually on our podcast episode number 89. I just looked it up so I could share the actual episode number 89. So that was a very cool combination, and I really like that combination. So I'm glad you're doing that, Vanessa. And
yes, and thank you to him, because that's been a big help in neck strength and getting the mobility back, and combining that with 500 frequency has been very helpful for what I have going on.
that's awesome. That's a great insight there. So you've mentioned a few things already about the mechanisms of swallowing and vocal cords, and the muscles that contract and control vocal cords, and how when they're not working right, that impairs your ability to breathe. And you've talked about a few of the cranial nerve branches and stuff like that. So can you give us, I don't, I mean, you could give us, a full episode masterclass on the neuroanatomy and the physiology of swallowing and vocalization, but can you give us, the little bit higher level overview of some of the biggest mechanical processes that happen in speech and in swallowing, and then some of the most important and relevant neurological structures, so that we have a foundation for talking about, how we might be able to influence some of those with direct current, and some of the methods that we'll likely go on to talk about.
Yes. So, boy, the voice and swallowing muscles are very intricate, very delicate. I have, where is it? Let me grab it real quick. Some other tools that I've used, EMST, to use for strengthening the diaphragm too.
So if you're just listening, she's showing us something on the screen. If you're watching, of course, you can see it.
It's called the EMST, Expiratory Muscle Strength Trainer.
So is that something that you breathe through, that is resisted breathing? Oh yeah.
You breathe, and it works on strengthening the vocal cords. So this vocal cords, I mentioned too, that I have PVFM. So when I'm going to breathe, they open to allow the air to come through. So right now, for the people that aren't watching, it's like the shape of a V. They open to allow air to in, and then the same thing happens when you communicate. Well, my nerves and the big ones, it's like vagus nerve was huge for me, not only for that fight or flight, but that was a big nerve for me that was really damaged. So when I go to swallow, sometimes the muscles, I'm trying to simplify, but the muscles don't contract to allow the food to come down into the esophagus. So sometimes it might go into the lungs, and that's where it gets real dangerous. That's why they gave me a G-tube, because the food was going into the wrong area. And I was at a huge risk for aspiration. So they gave me the G-tube. I had about 3 different, it's called modified barium swallow studies, where they have you swallow barium to see where the food is going. And mine was going down the wrong tube. I was aspirating.
Yeah.
So it was a very severe swallowing disorder. And that's, again, that's why the G-tube was placed. About 5 months or so, I think I was tube fed. But it's a very complicated process, and it's very scary. Having swallowing disorders is a very scary thing for patients, because you're at risk choking. There's a lot of PTSD that patients experience too after experiencing a swallowing disorder. And these are things that I learned by being the patient in the bed, that there's so much fear associated with swallowing disorders, again, because you're afraid, when you're out in public, okay, what if I choke in front of these people? What if my nerves misfire and something else happens? And my nerves, they were misfiring all the time. I'd start choking, start coughing, just because the recurrent laryngeal nerve, the vagus nerve, they were so severely damaged. There was a lot of demyelination that happened in the nerve, similar to MS. That's what Guillain-Barré is. The myelin sheath of the nerve demyelinates, and those electrical impulses were not communicating anymore. That's where the Neubie for me was so life-changing, because it got that brain-body connection going again, and I could feel it after just a few sessions. I thought, this feels different. My voice was getting stronger. My swallowing was getting stronger. Was it perfect? No. But was it better? Yes, I'll take those wins. That's huge. And yeah, it was, I would hook up the little pads just all around the throat area. I even got the little ones, but I do like your new butterfly pads. But I got the little circle ones, smaller than the 1-inch ones. And I would hook them all up. You can see my scar there, but and just do swallowing exercises. And one of the things that I learned by being the patient is, you know, therapists in the hospital in the ICU side, and they give you all sorts of exercises to strengthen those muscles, strengthen that anatomy, strengthen the vocal cords. And I would do them religiously. I was always doing the exercises, doing probably more than I should be doing, and nothing was working. Like, I would just, and I was so frustrated. Nothing was working. What's going on here? Then I hooked those up. I got the direct current going, and that was game over.
That's awesome. I love that. I love that breakthrough where it is. I mean, that happens a lot, you know, in all walks of life, and especially in cases of neurodegenerative conditions where you try to do an exercise and it's just like you're fumbling around in a dark room looking for a light switch. You can't really find that neurological pathway, and so you can't. And you know, if you need to, in this analogy, it's like you need to flip the light switch up and down thousands of times to drive that circuit in order to make an adaptation or change. And it's like you're fumbling around and you can't even find it once. So how are you going to do it thousands and thousands of times to create those repetitions?
Well, something else that I found interesting too were just what you guys call the points of interest, or the places where there's no sensation.
Yeah.
And I found that interesting too, as I would go around just my neck area with the glove, and I'd find a lot of areas that were just, there was nothing. And I would just work those areas, and I think, well, that's interesting. And I found one I'll never forget. It was kind of like deep, and I go, wow.
Like base of the scalene, between the scalene and the collarbone there.
Yes, exactly. And I remember thinking, wow, my pain's gone after just kind of working that area, massaging that area just with the glove. I had a lot of pain up in the hyoid area and the hyoid muscles associated with swallowing. And that pain, those hot spots are, and the points of interest where there's no sensation are definitely something to be looking into.
Yeah, for sure. It's so interesting. So many people listening to this are at least familiar with our mapping process, where we're most commonly looking for hotspots where there's a greater reaction against the current, because that tells us that the body is protecting or compensating against that, or in response to that load introduced by the current. And of course, there's also times where there's more numbness or less sensitivity, and we want to pay attention to those as well. That's more commonly in cases like this of Guillain-Barré or MS or neuropathy, or cases where the sensory nerves are going to be affected. So I'm glad you mentioned that. One other thing that you mentioned, Vanessa, that I want to touch on, it reminds me of, I read, this book was a really profound impact on me along the early stages of my journey here. I read The Polyvagal Theory by Stephen Porges, and he talks about this contradiction about how the vagus nerve can be both very positive, but it can also be problematic, because the vagus nerve can trigger loss of consciousness, the freeze response, and in infants it can trigger them to shut down and lose consciousness and things like that if they get into tachycardia or different sort of things. So there's a sort of paradox, and he proposed this polyvagal theory where the paradox, quote unquote paradox, where the vagus nerve does two different things, regulates physiology in one way and then freezes and shuts down. He has this hypothesis around how there's actually two different branches of the vagus nerve, and they work in a hierarchical system, about how the ventral branch increases heart rate variability and helps us manage and partition our resources appropriately for normal activity. And then when that gets overwhelmed, we go to the sympathetic nervous system. And then when that gets overwhelmed, we can't meet whatever the stress or challenge is. Then the dorsal branch, the more primitive, more early from an evolutionary perspective, branch of the vagus nerve takes over. And that's the freeze response. That's where feigning death, playing possum, vasovagal response happens. And that's the system getting overwhelmed, basically saying, we're just going to feign death and hope that whatever enemy is here thinks that we're dead and doesn't kill us. And then we can wake up on the other side and be okay. It's just like a last resort. And there can also be a version of that when someone is in a complete state of, restoration, shutting down, like when someone just feels like, oh, just can't get off the couch, that sort of thing, just can't even get up. I mean, it's that sort of thing, just, perhaps even more extreme. So one of the interesting things that really struck me about that was this pro-social nature of when we're in that vagus nerve, that ventral branch of the vagus nerve, when that is able to regulate our physiology, there's a lot more pro-social tendencies. And one of those signs is not only the pro-social, tendency to want to engage more, but also increases in vocal inflections. And he talks about how the vagus nerve, so I'm curious if you can talk to us a little bit about that anatomy, because you mentioned the vagus nerve and it reminded me of that. So does the vagus nerve, does it directly control muscles of vocalization, or is it related because they're cranial nerves that emanate from similar nuclei?
Cranial nerves that emanate from yes. There's a lot of different cranial nerves that work on vocalization, and you are nailing all of it. And it's so important to understand that vagus nerve. And it's one of those things that in grad school, and I'm going to keep circling back to grad school, but it's not talked about enough about how important that nerve is for healing. It's so profound. And I love Porges's work. I've done so much deep dive since my own illness, is just understanding the nervous system, sympathetic, parasympathetic nervous system, and how important that vagus nerve is. Not only it's for healing, number one, because again, if we are in fight and flight, there's no way your body can heal if you're scared. We need to feel safe. And that's another thing Porges talks about, is feeling safe in our bodies. When we feel safe in our bodies, we can heal. When we're scared, when we're in fight and flight, when we're constantly in running motion, rage, your body can't heal. So I think that nerve, it's so important. It's so important to heal that nerve. And that was one thing that I dove into with the Master Reset, that I made sure I was doing that as much. And I still do it to this day, because you need to be calm. You need to be focused. You need to be present. And all of those things are just so important. And then when that nerve is being activated, your voice gets stronger. Your swallowing gets stronger. When your voice is stronger, you feel more confident speaking. Most people wouldn't even know, hearing me talk right now, that there's any type of vocal cord issues. It's gotten so much stronger because, and I've even done, I'm going to tangent here, but I've even gone from 500 into some of the more strength training frequencies with the pads, doing swallowing exercises, and my EMST in some of the, the 40, 55 range. But again, yes, that vagus nerve, I think that's one of the more important ones.
Thank you so much for listening to the Undercurrent podcast. If you're interested in learning more about how NeuFit and the Neubie can impact your life, please visit our website at www.neu.fit. That's NEU.FIT. So you can learn more about how it might integrate into your professional practice, how you can use it as a patient, and you can also connect with our team there. And there is I think you're sort of validating that there is, even if it doesn't directly control the muscles of vocalization, there is a strong connection between vagus nerve tone or activity and vocalization there too.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Absolutely.
So you talked also about just now and a couple times previously too about doing some work on your own neck and throat. So I got to put on my compliance hat and make a disclaimer. We're exercising caution around this area. Typically we don't blanket recommend using the Neubie on the areas of the throat and things like that. However, when you're talking to an SLP for whom working with electrical stimulation in that area of the body is squarely within the scope of practice, and you are trained and skilled in that, it's of course a whole different context altogether. But I would be curious to hear a little more about what that's like from your perspective. So part of the context for why I say that we don't really make those blanket recommendations. We don't want someone to stimulate at a power level that's too high, for example, and cause someone to feel like they're, choking or suffocating or can't breathe. Or we don't want to interrupt any of these mechanisms. As you said, Vanessa, the muscles are very delicate and the control is very precise. And, we generally, without the requisite skills and training, don't want to risk interrupting that, of course. So can you talk to us for those of us who have little to no experience using electrical stimulation in that area of the body? Can you talk to us a little bit about what your framework is and your approach in terms of what you're trying to stimulate, how much stimulation you're trying to do, sort of just I'm not trying to lead the witness or not trying to do too much. Just you can just let us know your framework and your approach there, please.
So it's funny that you bring that question up, because I know when listening to all your trainings, I've done all of them, and you've made it very clear the disclaimer. Excuse me. And I was the SLP that I thought, no, I'm going to dive in. I'm going to do this. I'm not scared. Like, I'd be more scared of going back and getting another MRI or having to go back into ICU. But I thought, you know what? No, in grad school, there's NMES devices, the neuromuscular. And this is where my training and my research and the rabbit hole that I went down, the devices and I remember asking my SLP when I was in the ICU and saying, okay, well, what about, I think it's called Vital Stim. What about that? Like, what is your thoughts on that? Just getting another person's opinion. She goes, well, the research, and I was like, yeah, I know, I've heard the research. Well, now that I know the difference between alternating current and direct current, I realized when I came across the Neubie that, I'm not scared of this. I'm not scared to try it. I know your disclaimer, but I also knew in my head, like, I'm not afraid of this. I'm gonna do it. Yes, I don't crank it up all the way. I have it at a very comfortable level, 5, 6 or so. And like I said before, I would just put the pads down here. And I had the little ones, maybe the little 1/2-inch ones. And I would just drink water, swallow, and just practice the actual movement of just swallowing. Because that's one of the things that when I got out of ICU and I went to rehab, I was failing my modified barium swallow studies. So when I went into the radiology room, they have you swallow the barium, and it was disastrous each time. Like every time I'd come back and they say, no improvement. And of course I'd sit there in my bed crying, thinking, okay, it's been a month. How is nothing improving after all of these exercises? No improvement. So one of the SLPs that I had in outpatient, she goes, we need to just get you eating. Let's just get you eating. So let's just bypass all these exercises. And I knew they weren't working. She knew they weren't working. I was sick of wasting my time. So she just got me eating. So then by the time I was discharged from outpatient, I was on my own to learn everything. And that's, again, where I came across the Neubie. And I thought, okay, there's a difference between what I was taught in school about these alternating current devices that are not effective. And trust me, I bought all of them. Not all of them, but I bought a lot of them because I was desperate. I got out of the hospital setting. I got to rehab myself. I got to get something. And all I knew out there at the time was these alternating current devices that you can get for $300-400. You know what I mean? The ones you can get on Amazon or whatever. And then I came across yours, and then I thought, okay, listen to your disclaimer, read between the lines. I'm like, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm not scared. I'm already, bad enough. What can happen? And then I started to realize, you know what? No, my voice is feeling stronger. I was doing 500. I was able to eliminate some of the pain associated with the swallow. And I kept doing it and doing it and doing it. And, I know your disclaimer, but it works. It's helped me immensely.
That's awesome. And I think there's a little bit of a difference in paradigm here. So when you're talking about the delicate nature and precision of control of these muscles, it's not, I think it's also helpful to understand what it's not. It's not, maximizing stimulation on a glute muscle during a deadlift where it's a concentric only movement and that muscle is just engaged. It doesn't even have to relax at all. It's just engaged maximally the whole time. And you're trying to increase motor unit recruitment and get as much tension, as much force out of that as you can. That's one extreme. On the other extreme here is what you're talking about, where rather than using technology like the Neubie to let's say hijack motor units and cause them to contract, you have it on a lower power level before that threshold where it's actually causing contraction, where it's just creating this sensory and afferent input. And how I would describe it is that when you have more sensory and afferent input coming from that area of the body, your brain, you're increasing proprioception, or in the case of movement, increasing that kinesthetic awareness. So your brain is getting more signal from that part of the body, and therefore it's able to see more clearly where that part of the body is in space and what it's doing, and more clearly understand the nature of what's going on in that part of the body. And it makes it easier to send down efferent signals and better, more precisely coordinate the control of opposing muscles and the timing of sequences and things like that. So I think that what you're doing there, one, it's a different paradigm and it's useful from a motor learning and adaptation perspective. And two, it also speaks to some of the safety, the reason why, if you're not actually over that threshold at which you're causing contraction, why, some of those reasons for precaution are being addressed, and it's safer than one might think if they were being concerned, or that sort of thing. So I think that the way you describe that is beautiful. And does that framework, do you think that adds anything to it? I don't know. To me, that's how I think about things.
Yes, it adds to it immensely. Neuroplasticity is a beautiful thing, let me tell you. Whew.
Yes.
And that's the Neubie right there, is neuroplasticity. And that's what I tell everybody when I'm working with them. And I just go over the background and how the Neubie can help with neuroplasticity. It's beautiful, absolutely beautiful.
And I do think, at the risk of being repetitive here, I do think that importance is not fully appreciated oftentimes, of increasing that afferent sensory input into the nervous system, the degree to which that can facilitate the overall process of adaptation and help us harness the power of neuroplasticity. Because neuroplasticity is neither good nor bad. It's just a capability for change. We want to harness that in a good direction. So that,
and the body wants to heal.
Yeah.
It wants to heal. It wants to get back to that state. You just got to give it the right inputs.
Yes. Beautifully said. Beautifully said. So let's transition now to your professional practice. And you've alluded to a few different scenarios where you've used the Neubie with your own patients. Can you talk to us now about some of the most impactful ways that you've used the Neubie professionally, when you're actually now no longer being a patient yourself, but putting on your SLP, putting on your clinician hat, and going back to working with patients?
Oh, I love when I have a new client in front of me and I tell them my journey, and I say, look at me, look at what this device did for me. And they look at me and they're like, that was you? And I say, yeah, go look at my website, or go read my book. You'll hear my entire story of what my family went through. And it's just miraculous. So some patient stories. Let's think here. I did mention my students that I've had with autism and master reset. One thing that I have learned from you and from the Neubie as well is that FSM, that's something that I've kind of started tapping into recently, which has been super exciting. I got a custom care device, and because I started out using Neubies, all the different FSM protocols and things like you guys have for MS, and those have been life-changing for a lot of my clients. So kudos to you for those too. But
Awesome.
again, I went down rabbit holes again and started doing more research. I went and saw an FSM practitioner over the last fall, and it was, whoa, there's something more to this FSM stuff too. So I got into that, and I've been using that with patients with just neuropathy, autism, MS, just overall neurodegenerative diseases, things like what I've got going on with the FSM tube and doing some different frequencies, a lot of the concussion protocols that you guys use, increasing secretions. So that's been fun. That's been real fun to add that into the whole repertoire too. A lot of more of the fight or flight stuff, because again, young kids, how can they learn when their nervous system is dysregulated? How can they sit in class for 6, 7, 8 hours? ADHD, how can they learn if they're just in fight or flight all the time? So I've been doing a lot of FSM stuff with that too. So I've really taken the Neubie in a complete different route than the PTOTs, even though I do that stuff. And trust me, I do it myself all the time. I'm always doing strain training and things like that with the Neubie as well. But there's so many other things that I've just researched, and my eyes have opened to this whole idea, not only neuroplasticity, but the vagus nerve and fight and flight and getting people to feel safe after an ICU experience. So how can we, back to Porges, our bodies need to feel safe to heal. How can we help them feel safe? Well, we can definitely do the master reset. There's all sorts of frequencies on the FSM devices that work on just that parasympathetic drive so they can properly heal. So that's kind of things that I've been more passionate about lately, helping the families, helping the parents of kids with autism, so the parents are regulated so they can help their children, and obviously helping the children too, so they're just in a more calm and relaxed state. So it's been fun, really, like learning different things and taking the Neubie in different avenues lately.
Awesome. So I want to ask you about a few of these populations. Well, specifically, I want to ask you a little more about, you mentioned working with some children of autism. I want to ask you about that. But first, this diverse patient population, are these the types of patients you were seeing before, or has this broadened? Is this different now after your own recovery experience, after getting the Neubie? What's that like compared to how it was before?
It's definitely different.
Uh-huh.
For example, before I didn't have anybody with neuropathy. Neuropathy is, very common. So a lot of foot baths, hand baths. That is completely new. Kiddos with autism, that was my staple before.
Okay.
That's such a rising population of kids that need services. So that's always, but now I just treat it differently. Now the way I go about working with these kids that are more in a fight or flight situation, I want to work on their nervous system first before we would work on communication. But now I look at it from a different lens. Okay, I might have a student in front of me that's 10 years old that's nonverbal, but he's also running around the room. He can't sit still. He can't even sit in a chair for 2 minutes to work on therapy tasks. So how am I going to get him in a more regulated state so he can attend, so he can do the exercises? Well, that's where things like master reset come into play, FSM. We can get him in a more calm, relaxed state. I've had parents tell me too that that their child with severe autism, that one of the common characteristics that they have is lack of eye contact. They'll just kind of look around or look over you. And I had a mom recently say, Vanessa, he's looking at me now. He's actually looking at me and like giving me eye contact. I'm like, wow, he's aware of you. But that's the reset. It's calmed his nervous system down so he can be present. He can take in the stimuli around him. So it's really transformed the patients that I worked with before. It's just changed the approach on how I address them. Like people that I've gotten out of the ICU, well, the first thing I look at now is their mental health. If they're severely depressed, suicidal, that was all me. How are they going to heal? How are they going to want to participate in therapy if their nervous system is completely dysregulated? If they're not feeling safe in their body, if they're scared, what can I do to get them regulated? And if I can get them regulated, then we can work on the speech exercises, the swallowing exercises, the communication exercises. So yeah, I have a new set of clients that are doing different thing or with different set of issues that come to the table. But I've learned so much by being the patient that I just take it differently. I go at it at a different approach.
Interesting. So I'm also curious, just double clicking on autism here. You mentioned before everything we've talked about today, you would see that was an area of specialty for you. You would work with a significant number of autistic children, and you'd work with them on communication. That was your thing. So are they coming to you in that scenario? Are you the primary person they're going to see? Are they going to an SLP, going to see you and also a few other things? Or is working on communication, is that sort of the main thing that they're coming to you? And then also, two-part question, what are you doing with them before? What would work before you got this, kind of understood this first domino of nervous system regulation even better and started, beginning plans of care there? So multi-part question, I know.
Yeah. So I'll address the first one. So they're also getting a lot of OT. So they're getting a lot of OT for not only fine motor skills, writing, but just for sensory, being able to transition from one task to another. Some of our kiddos will have meltdowns when they transition from, say, home to school or school to daycare. So they need a lot of that for OT services. Some of them will get things like PT if there's some more challenging motoric problems that are presenting, but it's mostly speech, communication, OT for sensory. And that's, again, it's like kind of like I feel like I overlap now, that if I can get their sensory system in a calm, relaxed state where they're feeling safe and regulated, it not only works for speech therapy services, but it helps with the occupational therapist as well, because the student is regulated. And I forgot your second question. What was the second half of that?
Well, that was, you essentially addressed it in terms of what you'd be doing with autistic children in the past, and it sounds like it was so a combination. You'd be working with them in this domain. They'd also be doing OT work for, would the term be sensory integration? I know I hear that term thrown around a lot. And then you've talked about how by sort of prioritizing now nervous system regulation as more of the first domino, that's really changed the overall trajectory of your interactions with these and your plans of care and the course of progression with these kids.
Well, autism is a nervous system disorder. Their nervous systems are completely offline. They have a difficult time sitting. They have ADHD, ADD. Not only they're dealing with that, but then they're dealing with communication challenges. Autism is a spectrum disorder. You may have students that are very high functioning, that are very verbal, that are high achieving. And then you may have your other kids with autism that are on the other side of the spectrum, that are nonverbal and requiring significant needs, and may be presenting with more behavioral challenges too. So a lot of those kids that are experiencing more of the behavioral challenges, difficulties listening, sitting in a seat, school environments for a lot of our kids are very stimulating. They're very loud. There's a lot of kids on campus. There's loud bells going off and announcements going, and it really dysregulates their nervous system. So for me, from a speech standpoint, again, I now take it from a different angle, where I think in order to get these kids the ability to be able to go out to Target, any store, and be regulated and be able to take in all that sensory input, like the lights in a store, and like I said, the announcements at a school campus, they need to be regulated. So I'm taking it from a different standpoint, that I need to regulate their nervous system. And then we can work on the communication skills. We can work on building sentences. We can work on voice and swallowing, whatever it may be.
Yeah, beautifully said. I love that and totally agree. The last topic that I want to bring up here is to ask you to tell us about your book. I love the title because I love a good pun. And the title is Speechless.
Yes. So, how a speech therapist lost her ability to speak and her silent struggle to reclaim her voice and life.
So
yes.
Can you Tell us, please, about your book.
So the book took me 4 or 5 years to write. I finally got to the point that I thought, I got to get this book out. I need to get my message out. I need to help people. People need to know my story, what my family went through. Like I said, the PICS, the post-intensive care syndrome, what goes along with an ICU stay, the depression, the anxiety. Because people often think, oh, you survived the ICU, you're good, right? Like, yay, go Vanessa, you made it, you're back to work. Well, no, there's still lasting cognitive trauma, PTSD that needs to be addressed in a lot of our ICU survivors. So back to my book. So my book is a journey from initial onset to probably, I get into the Neubie in the book, so about a year or two, but it goes over the entire journey of what it was like for me to be in the bed, to learn to communicate again. Like I said, using eye gaze, using, looking at letters on a board to tell my husband I was in pain, to the process of learning to walk again, to, all the swallow studies that I went through, the relationships that I formed with my doctor and my staff that helped me write the book. They've been amazing in helping me just through this whole journey. It goes over, what my family endured and the relationships with people around me. It's a very good story for not only speech therapists, but patients, OTs, social workers, PTs, anybody that works with patients. Just surviving a critical illness is very beneficial for. But again, it took me so long to write it because just reliving all the trauma was hard. It was a scary period of time.
I can imagine. Did you find was it cathartic to get that out?
Oh, the day it launched, it was like, it's done. It's
No
done.
problem.
It's out there. My story's out there. But since then, though, it's been good. I've done a lot of speaking engagements. Just this week, I spoke to a group of speech pathologists back in Washington, D.C. I was in Arizona a couple weeks ago, just educating people. I ask people all the time, these are skilled speech pathologists and people that work in acute care. And I say, have you ever heard of PICS? No one knows. And I said, and I start to educate them on the psychological trauma and what the nervous system goes through after a stay in the ICU and what clinicians can do to help regulate the nervous system so that patients can heal. I talk about, too, ICU diaries and how ICU diaries can help the nervous system in the ICU when you're in that acute state and you're in that fight or flight state. And nobody knows about these things. So that's some of the things that I'm really passionate now about, is just giving clinicians tools to help patients feel safe. Back to Stephen Porges's research of just helping the patients feel safe so they can heal properly and not have these lingering effects of PTSD and the trauma associated with being in an ICU, because it's a scary place, especially when you go from never being in an ICU and being completely thriving and healthy, and then all of a sudden one day you wake up and you're hallucinating and they have you on fentanyl and Dilaudid and you're seeing fireworks going off in your room and you think you're in jail. And
Dang. Yeah. Now I think everyone listening to this can understand how that would be traumatic.
yeah
hearing that. Uh, as we wind down here, is there anything, Vanessa, that you feel like you need to share or that we need to cover to round out the topics, or add in something else that you feel like really needs to be communicated here today?
My big thing is just thank you to you and your team. I've got goosebumps right now because I'm 7 years out and it's been a bucket list of mine to be able to speak to you, and I get emotional, as I said, but to be able to have you in front of me and tell you to, well, not face to face, but screen to screen, how appreciative I am of your team and everything you guys do to help people get their lives back. And, you help me get mine back and help my daughter get her mom back, my husband, his wife back, and my mom and dad, their daughter back. And I know I'm just one of hundreds of thousands of lives you've impacted, but thank you to all of you guys.
Well, you're welcome, and thank you so much. I mean, to hear this is really inspiring and humbling and just so wonderful. And it's one of those things that there's a lot of challenges along the way. And I never set out to start a medical device company, but of course did do that. And it was very, very challenging along the way, and there's a lot of difficulties, and a conversation like this, it has the resonance for me of just, it's all worth it.
You're in the right place and you're doing the right thing. Yeah, growing a business is scary. It's hard. There's setbacks and you doubt yourself. And I know I had that same feeling just recently when I told you I was speaking at a group in Washington, D.C. And when I said, have you guys, this is a group of skilled clinicians that have many, many years of experience working as SLPs. And when no one in the room, when I asked them, I said, has anybody heard of post-intensive care syndrome? No one raised their hand. And I said, okay, perfect. I'm in the right place. My work that I'm doing, like you, even though you may doubt yourself, when you hear people come back and say certain things, you're like, I know I'm in the right place. I'm doing the right thing. I'm impacting lives. So keep it up. You are changing the world.
Well, thank you. As are you, for the patients you're working with, the other clinicians you're educating, everyone who's read your book. So I'm going to ask my final question here, Vanessa. If you could have an opportunity to share a message that you shouted from the rooftops or put on a billboard, for everyone to see, you're shouting it for everyone to hear, putting it on a billboard for everyone to see, you had that chance to do that with one message, what would your message be?
Oh, one message. Oh, gosh, I have a million. I want to give people hope. Letting people know you're not alone. There's help out there for ICU survivors. There's resources out there. Oh, yes, there's resources. When I got out of ICU, I felt so alone, so scared. Like, I'm the only mom in the world that's paralyzed, that can't feed herself, that can't drive. But letting people know that they're not alone in their medical journey, and that there's so many resources out there, that the body can heal. It will heal. Oh, those are things that I wish I knew when I got out of the hospital setting, that there's hope, your body, neuroplasticity. There's people out there. There's resources out there. Don't give up. There you go.
Have faith, find resources. Yes.
Find a Neubie practitioner.
Yes, that's right. Those are the big three.
I'm so grateful for mine. I'm going to see him tonight, actually, the guy that introduced it to me. And I always tell him, like, oh, the Neubie.
That's awesome. I'm glad you're still working with him.
Yeah, we talk. Our friends, our kids are friends, so.
Oh, nice. Very good. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So if people want to read your book, Speechless, that's on Amazon. Is that the best place to get it?
Yep, Amazon. Mm-hmm.
And then your website, can you tell us how it's spelled, Anew Healing?
Yeah, Neu, like Neubie. Just a new way to heal. That's where I kind of got that spin on that. .com. So yeah, they can go on there. They can read about my story, my medical journey, and what I do as a speech pathologist with the Neubie.
And so it's a new way to heal, she said, but it's anewhealing.com.
Mm-hmm.
The URL there.
Yeah.
And thank you, Vanessa. It was so good to officially get to meet and connect with you as part of recording this podcast. And I really appreciate you sharing your story with NeuFit Nation here today, and all the work that you're doing to really turn your pain into purpose and help other clinicians level up their skill set and inspire people and help the patients you're working with. You're doing great things. And again, just really appreciate you coming on and sharing all of your experience and perspective with NeuFit Nation today. So thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you.
All right. And thank you, dear listener, for tuning into this episode. We will see you next time on the Undercurrent Podcast.